Hi, I'm Stephen with AlbertaUrbanGarden.ca. On today's episode, we have a special background as I'm traveling, so I thought I'd bring you along. Now that the soil is workable and we've got some of our cold hardy crops already in the ground, we also have some of our warmer plants started in the house. It's time to clean up the garden in anticipation of the growing season this year. I like to start this process in the areas of my garden that I need immediately for my cold hardy crops and slowly move towards areas that I won't need until much later in the season. This lets me spread the work out if I need to. You know, it can be done 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. During the winter, the mulch protects the soil and plants from drastic temperature changes. Now that things are warming up, you will want to pull it back in order to help prevent diseases that can be caused by direct contact with your plants. I don't pull it back too far, and I leave the leaves in place as the mulch will break down and feed our plants while restricting weeds throughout the growing season. For perennials like strawberries, make sure to crumple up the dead leaves as soon as they are dry to allow the sun to penetrate the protective canopy and return them to the mulch layer. The fall compost we made of autumn leaves, used coffee grounds, and other green materials has long since finished its first thermal cycle and is cooled off and frozen. Even though the compost is frozen, the cycle of freeze and thaw will continue to break down the material in the compost. As the weather is warming, you can restart the thermal cycle by turning the pile and adding more oxygen to it. If it looks like you don't have a good balance of greens versus browns, now is a great time to add them. Kickstarting the thermal cycle will help the material break down between now and when we need to plant in May. If the pile is still frozen, you can help it by covering it up in a tarp or some translucent plastic. If you've got an old cold frame, you can put that on top as well. What this will do is it'll help capture some of the sun's heat during the day, adding a little bit of heat to help you thaw out just a little bit faster. If you have a prolonged windy, sunny, dry period in the spring, make sure to check the soil from time to time to make sure it has sufficient moisture. Keeping a little bit of moisture will help the beneficial organisms continue their great work preparing your soil for another growing season. With nighttime temperatures staying above -5 Celsius or 23 Fahrenheit, it's time to take the burlap off your tender perennials. In the fall, I made sure to cover my grapevines in burlap in order to protect them. What damages tender perennials like grapes in the winter is the drying out of the cambium layer. The cambium layer is the growth point for most stems. If you incur winter damage, usually the plant past the winter damage will actually die. Both the sun and wind can dry out the plant, causing winter damage. The wind simply evaporates the moisture, while the sun can damage it by both evaporation and allowing the plant to heat up while in the sun. The sap will begin to run during the day and then freeze at night. This causes damage and depletes the moisture reserves the plant has to overwinter with. Now that the soil is workable, the plant is able to take up moisture, helping to prevent further damage. This is a great example of the damage caused when unprotected versus an area that was protected on the same plant. I have a special guest today. It's Kaye from the Late Bloomer Show, and she's got a question for me.
Hi Stephen, Kaye here in the Late Bloomer Garden in not so sunny Southern California with a question. I have a small garden and it doesn't rain very much here, so I don't have a problem with weeds, except for clover, which seems to pop up everywhere. Now, I understand clover is a nitrogen fixer for the soil, so what should I do about clover in a small garden? Because if I let it go, it would go everywhere. Also, what's the connection between oxalis and clover? Because where there's clover, there seems to be oxalis, which can be very invasive.
That's a great question, Kaye. Clover is commonly sold as a cover crop for its ability to fix nitrogen. What the clover does is it forms a beneficial relationship with soil-borne bacteria and trades sugar and protection for atmospherically fixed nitrogen into a form that the plant can actually take up. There are also claims that its presence and flowering can attract beneficial pollinators and insects like honeybees. If you are using it as a cover crop, make sure to chop and drop the plant prior to it flowering. If you are in an area like me, generally winter does this for me. If not, you may have to cut it down. To my knowledge, there's no relationship between oxalis and clover, other than the fact that they can both live like weeds if there's open soil for them to live in. Interestingly enough, oxalis is commonly mistaken for 4-leaf clover and sold that way. Oxalis does not fix nitrogen like clover does. However, its leaves are edible, but they're fairly bitter due to the high concentrations of oxalic acid. Clover and oxalis can be quite invasive, outcompeting your regular garden plants for nutrients and water. If you're in a small garden and can't afford the competition, it may be a good idea to cut the plants off at the soil level and mulch the garden heavily. If the plants have flowered, make sure to dispose of the green material. The mulch will help suppress the regrowth while providing nutrients to your soil. You will lose the nitrogen fixing of the clover and the edible leaves of the oxalis. However, the crops you want to grow will not have to compete, and other free and local resources and crops can provide the same benefits without really being as competitive. If you have not already seen Kaye's Late Bloomer show on YouTube, I highly recommend that you check it out. Thank you for spending time with me today. I appreciate it very much, and I hope you have a fantastic day.